I'm an animal control expert who specializes in cryptids. One cryptid is entering human homes more often than usual. This is a PSA. For years, I was the guy to call if you had a squirrel in your attic. I mean, to a lot of people, I'm still that guy. But over the last 20 years, I've branched out to other less common infestations. Now, I'm the guy you call if there is a haunted doll rummaging through your attic or a Sasquatch trampling your flower beds. I love my job. The specializations I've acquired have allowed me to travel across the country, meet incredible people, and experience cryptids like few have ever done before. It doesn't hurt that it pays great, but the stories are even better. I have a short story for you now. It's more of a public service announcement than anything else, really. I've dealt with every sort of infestation from Sasquatch. Spray human urine around the area of sighting and it would avoid the area. Demonic presence. Usually need to bring a priest in. Sometimes can be tricked into inhabiting a lesser creature like a frog. And jackalopes. It's just a bunny with antlers. Put it in a cage and give the poor thing a carrot. But there has been one cryptid that has been growing more and more invasive into the human settlements. The hidebehind. Most commonly found in the forests of the northern United States and Canada, the hidebehind is one of the cryptids that cannot easily be dealt with. In fact, I'm not sure it's even possible for one of these to be bagged and tagged like we normally would with other cryptids. To my knowledge, no hidebehind has ever been killed, maimed, dazed, or even simply removed from a residence. Once it has made a claim to an area, whether it to be a local forest, a cave, or even, in one particularly bloody case, a Bass Pro Shop, it will defend that area to the death. First documented by the Native Americans, then by lumberjacks in the PNW of America, the hidebehind is one of the lesser known cryptids on the continent, but without a doubt one of the most dangerous. No one really knows what they look like, as the name suggests. As soon as they are seen, they quickly duck out of view to hide behind anything in the vicinity. In the wild, this would be trees and rocks. In your home, this would be a corner, a kitchen cabinet, a television, or literally anything else, as they can manipulate their body to hide behind an object of any size. In the few accounts of the sightings we have on record, they have been described as everything from a large bear/lion hybrid to a frail and elderly woman with long arms and rashes on her skin. Because of this wide discrepancy in their description, they are believed to be shapeshifters that can change their shape based on what they believe will best get their potential victim to come closer and investigate the sighting. I don't know why the hidebehinds are moving into suburbs. I'd guess destruction of their natural habitat, but it's becoming a real problem. That's why I'm going to share this story with you now, so you know what to do if one shows up in your home. I pulled up to Tim's house around 12 p.m. on a Tuesday. He had called us in to tell us there was a demonic entity in his house, and we needed to remove it ASAP. They always demand ASAP. Tim had nothing going on, but people are so much more demanding than they were 20 years ago. I took a quick look around the house, and it was pretty apparent there wasn't any sort of demon in his residence. Not only was there no reaction to the holy water and Ouija board I brought with me, but Tim also didn't have normal symptoms of a demonic haunting, bad dreams, sleep paralysis, or the witnessing of any telekinetic events. After further questioning, he described what he had seen in more detail. First, I was sitting right there on the couch watching TV when I got the feeling I was being watched. I turned my attention to the screen door, and for just a second I saw a bear looking through the screen. But it wasn't a bear, you see? A bear wouldn't just keep on staring at me or keep poking at the door. But this thing just ducked out of view as quick as can be, like it was trying to sneak up on me, and I had to catch it in the act. It bothered me something awful, but I just grabbed my gun and sat it on my lap and kept watching the TV, and eventually that feeling, like I was being watched, just kinda melted off. It was all peaches and cream until she showed up a few days later. The she Tim was referring to was the human form that the hidebehind was taking. I assume it was because of the lack of reaction to the bear form it had previously shown itself as. Like I said earlier, the hidebehind wants you to look for it, to come nearer. Like the anglerfish, it dangles something in front of you in an attempt to bring you closer. It's a lazy hunter. I was out in the garage in my workshop and That feeling came over me again, that being watched feeling. I turned around and I'm looking out the garage door and I don't see nothing, but then out of nowhere I see a lady's head and shoulders pop out from the corner of the garage. And the second she sees me eyeing her, she pops right back around the corner where she came from. Well, this time I went looking around for her. I gave a wide berth around the corner because I lived in New York City for a year in the 70s, so I've seen some crazy people and she looked crazy. I didn't want her grabbing me, so I gave a wide berth around the corner and there wasn't no one there. I walked all around the house and didn't see anyone, not even footprints. Tell me that ain't demonic. It wasn't demonic, it was a hide behind, and I told the man as such. I told him living out here on the edge of town made him an easy target for it. I told him that there really isn't any way to get rid of them or scare them off. I told him he could try to leave his house for a year at minimum, and maybe, with luck, it would leave on its own. But the best bet would be for him to burn down the place and never come back. He didn't like that answer. My family lived in his house for 3 generations. I ain't leaving, and I sure as hell ain't burning nothing down. I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'll keep my shotgun on me, and when I get that feeling again, I'll just shoot. Works for bears. That's the meanest thing around these parts. Don't see why it wouldn't work for this. What do you call it? Hide behind? You can't argue with anyone over the age of 65. People get set in their ways. Their beliefs calcify. So instead, I was honest with him. I told him 2 things. The first thing I told him was that eventually he'd get the feeling that he was being watched, and he'd get his gun, and he'd start looking around for the hide behind. Only he wouldn't find it. That's what happens in all these cases, because at this point, it found the best hiding spot it could possibly get, the only place you won't be able to see to lay eyes on it, even if you tried, directly behind you, and at that point, it's too late for you. The second thing I told him was that I'd be back in 2 days and more than likely he'd be dead. And then I left. 2 days later, I pulled my van up to Tim's driveway to find the screen door open and blowing in the wind. I didn't even need to cross the threshold of his house to find him. He was everywhere. On the floor, the ceiling, the walls. The smell was unbelievable. I poured some gasoline on the front porch and lit a match. The house was an inferno within 30 seconds. I got in my van and started to pull out of the driveway, and I took one last look at the house, and then beyond it, out into the tree line where I saw, just for a split second, a young boy before he quickly pulled back and disappeared behind a thin little tree. I was hundreds of miles away by lunchtime. I say all of this to tell you, if you ever think you might have a hide behind in your house or even in the area, leave. Burn the place down if you can, so new people don't move in it. These things are like bears. If they know they can get food someplace, they are going to keep coming back. And if you get the feeling that you're being watched and you can't figure out why, call your loved ones, because it's standing directly behind you. A warning to wannabe cryptid hunters. I found another goddamn corpse. This time of the year is really something. Frost is painting the window panels. The snowflakes look like tiny stars falling from the sky, and I found a corpse on my property today. Or rather, one of the security guards did. He called me right away, talking in that sort of low, empty tone. He sounded dead inside, for lack of a better word.
Miss Novak.
He fell silent for a few seconds, like he hadn't really thought of what to say next.
You should come to the red metal, I think.
What do you mean, you think? I asked, a little annoyed seeing as I've been busy with some computer work at the moment. I instantly regretted my brusque tone.
There's a body.
I nearly dropped my cell phone, suddenly feeling weirdly disconnected from myself. I staggered to my feet, began fumbling my keys. I'll be right there, Gus. I promised, voice trembling, before ending the call. The red meadow is a wide plain right outside the eastern edge of the woods. It's full of these strange scarlet flowers. They're about the same size as a regular old daisy, but their petals are shaped a bit like tiny hearts. Weirdly enough, we've been unable to identify them. There are many flowers like them, but none are an exact match. My father used to obsess with them. He was always picking and drying them. He never found out more about them either, though. Today, a blanket of snow covered the meadow, yet the intense red of the flowers still managed to shine through in some places. I could see Fergus standing next to the tree line, stiffly waving at me. His shallow, labored breaths rose from his lips in tiny plumes of vapors as he jogged to meet me halfway. I didn't see it happen, he said dryly. I heard screams. I followed them, and there he was. Whatever did it was already gone by the time I got there. He led me over to the body. A man in his 30s, dressed in much of the same functional clothes as the first cryptid hunter, who had found his way onto my property not too long ago. My head was reeling. How did these guys keep getting in? I think he died of fright, Gus remarked. When I found him, he was lying on his stomach, with one of his arms underneath him. Why did you roll him over? Checking for injuries. Found nothing, not even a trace of blood. Look at his face, though. I sighed. I immediately avoided doing so up until that point. I kneeled down next to the dead man, gathering my large, far too voluminous skirt at my side. I raised my eyes to meet the corpse's empty gaze, shaking my head. I tried to chase the flashing memories of my little brother's severed head from my mind. All those who die in fear seem to share this same look. Their horror remains imprinted on their contorted grimace, preserved for the unfortunate enough to happen upon their bodies. Fergus was probably right. The way he'd found this man suggested he'd been on his way out of the woods, presumably running from something. Another thrill seeker who had too much of a good thing. It was even sadder to see him here, beyond the tree line. He nearly made it out alive. Then the adrenaline must have overtaxed his heart and he had fallen over, clutching his chest. I wondered if he'd realized what was happening. Maybe not. Maybe he'd been so terrified by whatever was chasing him that he hadn't even seen it coming. Either way, in his last moments there had only been him, this fearsome unknown entity, and his exerted, failing body. What a shitty way to go. Are you okay, Gus? Do you want to go home? You need me here, don't you? I do, but I don't want you to go around like nothing happened when you've just found a body, I argued. I'll be okay. It's not the first time we've had a death here. I gave him a concerned frown. He didn't sound all that convinced. He obviously didn't want me to fuss, so I didn't, but it felt crappy leaving him on that note. I told him to follow his normal route, hoping the rest of the day would go smoothly for him. To me, however, this corpse meant a lot more work. First off, I would have to dispose of him. It's not like we go entirely unnoticed out here. We could get a visit from the police in due time. Now, my family has maybe 2 or 3 friends among the local authorities who know what's really going on in these woods. They're likely to see that if someone goes missing on our property, no further inquiries are made. Imagine a search being launched in my forest. It'd be a bloodbath. Even so, best not to risk anything. The corpse still needed to disappear. The easiest way to do that was to dump it into the lake. In case I haven't mentioned it before, the lake is located about 20 minutes walk from the red meadow into a lighter, less densely wooded area. It's twin lakes, actually connected by a fierce old stream. I had the bigger one in mind though. Drop something in there and it'd be gone in a flash. Fall in yourself and, oh well. It hasn't froze over yet this year, so I decided to go for it right away. I don't have a vehicle fit to transport a corpse through the woods, but I do have Jeanette. Jeanette is a mule. I got one of the workers who was hanging out at my family's house at the moment to bring her right over. We loaded her up and I got on my way. The woods were quiet, as per usual. Walking alone normally agrees with me, but holding a corpse and a stubborn mule really put a damper on the mood. I tried to focus on the glittering snow beneath my boots and the many shiny icicles that made the forest resemble a stalactite cave. Anything but the dead body bobbing up and down on the back of the animal beside me. The wintry air was beginning to sting my bare shoulders. Seeing as I normally didn't mind it at all, that was saying something. Jeanette was being a drama queen. She always knows when I need her help, and it's then that she's the most uncooperative. With the sun going down in the afternoon this time of the year, Darkness was already beginning to settle over the treetops. The water surface was still and undisturbed, covered partially by thin plates of ice. I surveyed the lake with bated breath. As peaceful as it looked, I knew how volatile a state this tranquility posed come nightfall. "Grandfather!" I called out into the darkness, trying to keep my voice down. Now, the creature I was hoping to rouse obviously isn't my actual grandfather. It's just a nickname he, the Varianos, goes by. I needed to talk to him to ask permission before laying the ill-fated explorer to rest in his waters. The lake stayed eerily quiet. "Grandfather!" I repeated, a little louder this time. I hated having to raise my voice. The woods prefer silence. To my frustration, I received no response. The water remained an unblinking black mirror without so much as a bubble rising to the surface. It didn't look as though Grandfather Vandanos was going to show up, which meant that I was being faced with a difficult choice. I really didn't want to stick around for anything that might have overheard me shouting to drop in. I would have to dump the cadaver without consulting the big boss. Against my better judgment, I dragged the body off my mule and rolled it towards the edge of the lake. Giving it one last powerful shove, it fell off the small ridge and disappeared with a satisfying plop. I imagined it rapidly sinking to the bottom, and a weight fell off my shoulders. I lingered for merely a minute, wallowing in my melancholy and wondering if Vandanos would be mad at me when he woke up to find I'd used his haunting grounds as a garbage disposal. That question would not go unanswered for too long. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a fanatic, enormous splash sound swirling around. I let out a yelp of surprise when I saw the creature rise from the murky depths. He was twice my size, an old, green-skinned man with a nightmarish, contorted face that resembled that of a catfish more than a human's. I staggered backwards as he started dragging himself onto the dry land on his big paunch, his morbid, fleshy masses wrinkling and wiggling grotesquely. Algae hung in his long, tangled white hair, and scales covered the lower part of his body, which thinned into a fishtail. I cursed myself for not waiting for him earlier. Perhaps he heard me, lingering just beneath the surface, expecting me to make a transgression he could justly punish me for. I could feel I was about to pay dearly for my impatience. Grandfather, I'm sorry," I instantly cried out. I was nervous. I had to be quick, so I... He didn't answer, only letting out a gargling laugh as he wrapped one of his webby paws around my ankle, throwing me off balance. I landed on my ass in the dirt, blindly thrashing and kicking at his face. But before I knew it, he tugged me into a forceful embrace, pressed up against his slick, saggy chest. I gagged at the foul odor he emitted. The slimy muck coating his skin rubbed off onto my face, arms, and dress, instilling such a deep sense of disgust within me that I couldn't help but heave, now soiled with my own vomit. I was pulled into the icy water. I was too shocked, physically as well as mentally, to fathom a single clear thought. All I could do was screech like a banshee. The Vadianoi let go of me, giving me a meaningful look before shoving me further out onto the lake. My dress bore me up, and I was sent gliding through the water. "I do so despise impertinence," he called out to me, his voice equal parts rage-fueled and amused. It was raspy, wet, and blubbering, as though he was retching out water from his lungs with every word he said. "See you at the bottom." With that, he sank down, not causing a single splash. Fuck. Mom had warned me never to stand too close to the water's edge. What the hell had I been thinking? I started swimming towards the ridge again, only to realize in horror just how difficult it was. My voluminous skirt was already soaked, its weight seemingly doubling mine. There was white all over me. My puff sleeves had tightened, gripping my upper arms like chains. I was fighting against my own wedding dress, and it quickly gained the upper hand. I was barely able to stay afloat, much less reach firm ground again. My head kept bobbing under. I couldn't keep it above the surface for long. Gasping for air, my rapid movements brought me closer and closer to exhaustion. Just as I was sinking down once more, I caught a glimpse of a menacingly tall silhouette looming over the lakeside.
Quick, take my hand if you want to live.
The Leshy's voice cut through the water. I could hear it clearly even when submerged. Summoning my last bit of strength, I flung myself out of the water and reached for the monstrous, long-like arm he extended to me across the surface. It was long enough for me to climb it like an entire tree, but I was still too heavy, the dress dragging me under. I couldn't pull myself up. Spluttering and gasping for air, I dug my fingers into the Leshy's bark skin.
Shed your gown,
the wood demon commanded, urgency swinging along in his tone.
Wench, it'll drown you.
I can't, I cried out. Pull, just pull, I'll hang on. He let out a growl, then abruptly drew back his arm, taking me along. Plowing through the freezing water, I felt relief unlike anything I'd ever known. Once I was close enough, he grabbed me with both hands and lifted me out of the water, dropping me beside my mule. Jeanette had been standing beneath one of the old lakeside trees, resting up and not really minding my near-death experience. Coughing up dirty cold water, I huffed and panted, trying to catch my breath while furiously rubbing my own upper arms to try and regain some semblance of feeling in my frozen skin. I didn't see the Leshy change form, being more occupied with myself at that moment, but when I looked up again, I found the bearded man with a cudgel standing over me.
Why didn't you get out of your dress?
He asked, testily. I couldn't. It's hell to get into in the first place. You really think I could just pull down a zipper and it comes off? He looked almost annoyed. It was odd seeing him display such a human emotion.
I hope you're aware you just caused me some trouble, potentially. The Vatanoy is the lord of this lake. He's unlikely to appreciate my intrusion.
What are you getting at? He didn't respond right away. Instead, he gave me a long look, appraising me.
I'll tell you what, Harris. I'll see you home safely so that you don't freeze to death or get taken advantage of, all alone out here as you are. I will have saved you, and you are going to repay me.
The air felt even colder all of a sudden. I yearned for a dry, warm blanket to wrap around my shoulders, but my garments were drenched and more likely to freeze me into a statue. As much as it pained me to admit it, I needed his help dearly. I'll pay you back accordingly, I promised, pressing the words out between chattering teeth. But I'd be willing to bet you already have something in mind.
Right,
he said.
Of course I do, and you will follow.
I sighed. Yes, sir, I will. Michael was a 12-year-old boy who lived in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He lived with a small family of 3, since his father passed away when he was 7. In his middle school, he was in the cryptozoology group. In fact, he was the leader of said group. He and his 5 friends, Ashley, Ben, Zach, Kayla, and Joshua, would meet in a science classroom and discuss different cryptids and urban legends. Every week, they would choose another cryptid to discuss and another member to research it. They quickly flew through the list of cryptids easily, from Ahula to the Zanzibar leopard. Eventually, in December, they were at a loss of cryptids to research, until one member learned of another local legend, the Mothman. He told everything that he knew about him. One by one, this cryptid grew on them. They argued over who should study it, when Michael, being the leader, announced that everybody would do this as the cryptozoologist's final cryptid. He read everything he could about Mothman and, through reading the witness reports, found a possible hideout for it. Using all of the group's funds, they convinced the principal to give them a field trip to the West Virginia Ordnance Works, an abandoned World War II TNT factory. The bus driver drove 7 miles away from Point Pleasant and told them to come back if anything went wrong, and to stay together. The 6 kids jumped off the bus and slowly walked towards the first building of the Ordnance Works. Along the way, each kid muttered to each other about how the air smelled like smoke and how cold it was. Michael was the most excited. This was going to be amazing. He daydreamed about walking into the enigmatic looking building and being startled by Mothman sitting up on a perch, then discovering Mothman was friendly and riding him far away on the breeze. He smiled at the thought, but was interrupted when he saw he was at the door. He nearly squealed with excitement as he opened the door and held it for his friends to come through. They crept through the doorway with their shoes making a dragging sound against the dirt vinyl floor and came to a stop once they all were inside. Michael let go of the door and walked forward in silence. Everybody jumped when the door made a loud echoing slam that seemed to echo for hours. The building was dirty inside with brick walls, broken machines here and there, and one shattered window, which was the only source of light in a dimly lit building. They stood there in silence for a second before Michael broke the silence by taking a step forward. He looked back at his friends and they followed his lead and came forward. They walked through the large main room, dragging their feet as they walked. Ashley glanced out the window and saw what looked like a raven or a crow caw, then fly away. She sighed, letting a cloud of warm air come out of her mouth, and looked ahead. Michael opened up the door for them to go through, atop a set of rusty stairs, though Joshua insisted that they go through another door just underneath the stairs. Ashley insisted yet another door. Zach, fed up with the bickering, suggested that we split up into groups. Zach with Joshua, Ashley with Ben, and Michael with Kayla. They agreed to meet at the bus if anything went wrong. Michael grabbed the flashlight out of his backpack and turned it on. He nervously smiled at Kayla and continued on through the door. He opened it and it closed as he entered, which again made an echoing slam. They crept down the hallway, which was pitch black aside from the flashlight. They felt uneasy as they couldn't see anything 4 feet away from them. "So, how are you holding up, Kayla?" he asked to lighten up the mood a bit. "Fine, but something's off." What do you mean?" "I mean..." She was cut off by the sound of the door slamming. They quickly spun around and heard slow, scraping steps coming closer. They stared in horror and silence as the steps became louder and louder. 2 dim red lights appeared down the hall. Kayla wanted to ask what they were, but her throat seemed to swell shut. The lights grew brighter and bigger as the footsteps became louder. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped backwards nervously. There was one last step, then they stopped. The 2 huge red lights seemed to glow. Michael's arm twitched as he slowly raised the flashlight to the lights. It shone to reveal a humanoid creature with glossy features. Its feet were scaly and green with long black talons that seemed to dig into the ground. Its shoulders were about 1 foot taller than its head and were tipped with long black wings. And its head, it seemed to be pushed down into its chest, and it had 2 huge red eyes, as big as dinner plates with no pupils and no light, yet they seemed to glow. Its mouth appeared to be either missing or covered by feathers. The 2 children stared at the creature, too scared to move. The creature stood there, motionless and expressionless. Michael attempted to whisper, "Run," to Kayla, but all that came out was a loud squeak. Upon hearing this, the creature's eyes seemed to become even brighter, and it let out a horrible, otherworldly screeching noise, which reminded Michael of a mixture of a scream from a horror movie and an ambulance sirens. It unfolded its wings and charged at them. Michael screamed at Kayla to run, grabbed her hand and tried to run, but Kayla wouldn't budge. Her face was stuck in an expression of sheer terror, and she was staring the creature in the eyes. Michael tugged and tugged on her arm, but she wouldn't budge. The creature was practically on top of them, so Michael sighed and let go. He ran down the hall, gasping for breath. He heard a short scream, lasting only for a second, then heard nothing. The creature's eyes shone through the darkness and turned towards him. He screamed and sprinted down the hall. Thoughts raced through his head about what might happen if he was caught and how he would escape. He looked around desperately for an exit or a hiding place, but to no avail. He glanced behind him and saw it gaining on him, and fast. He felt his stomach turn and sweat roll down his face. He turned forward again and tried running faster. As he ran, he saw a door on the side of the hallway. Michael gasped and he ran ahead. He stopped quickly at it, locked. He looked to his left and saw the eyes getting closer and closer. He screamed again and frantically turned the knob back and forth. Click. The door opened. He ran inside and left the door slightly ajar. He backed away behind a table in the room and prayed it wouldn't find him. He heard the scraping footsteps again. Then he heard them slow. He held his hand over his mouth so it couldn't hear him. He was so terrified that tears rolled down his face. Through the blur of his tears, he saw that there was a hand mirror in the room, so he held it up to see behind him so that he didn't have to move. There it was. He yelped and turned around to see its red eyes gazing down on him. He screamed, "No!" as the silent creature leapt over the table at him. Afterwards, when it was time to leave, Zach, Ben, Josh, and Ashley met outside in the snow and asked each other if they'd seen Michael or Kayla. Nobody had. So they sighed, puffed out clouds of warm air, and kicked their feet off the ground. They were interrupted by a sudden ominous screech. They stopped sighing and turned to look at the building. The creature flew out the shattered window, and as it flew, it twitched and withered, and fell and rose. It was as though it was broken. It flew directly over the kids, and flew over the kids' heads. Something flew off as it flew by and landed on Ashley's hand. It was a drop of blood. It flew up into the sky, and it hasn't been seen since. "Mothman," Ben mumbled. "Cometh. Where is it now? Please, dear reader, don't think about it too much." Liberty City really comes to life at night. During the day, it's crowded, yeah, but not the same as the night. Nothing beats sitting atop of a skyscraper and staring down, and the array of lights blinking and flashing in every direction. Occasionally, you see a helicopter or a plane pass by in the distance. It's all so full of life. You would have thought that just under everyone's feet is the ongoing networks of tunnels and subway tracks. The trains run all through the night, from the lighting loading stations into the depths of those damn tunnels. Down in the heart of the trams lies a vast intersections of tracks. This area is also where a couple hundred homeless people flock to escape the cold and police. Most people like to call it Hoboland. While I've not been down there myself, I've heard stories from people that have. A couple accidents happened which caused the train to shut down right on the tracks. People there conversed with the homeless people and came back with the wildest stories of a strange being that apparently lived down there in the subway. This man could actually run swiftly, almost in a scurrying fashion, according to several witnesses. The story eventually evolved to where the man was supposed to have excess body hair and the face of a rat, deeming the name RATMAN. It made the nighttime subway ride all the more unnerving. I work in one of those skyscrapers you see at Liberty City. Most of the time, I get off at 9 p.m., just as nightlife is starting to pick up. But it's almost always dark by then. A few of my co-workers take the subway home at night too, one of whom is actually a close friend. At some point around a year ago, my friend, we'll call him Jordy, was caught up in one of those trams breaking down, not even 300 yards away from a maintenance entrance/exit for the tram workers. So Jordy told the driver that he would just walk up the exit and ride a taxi home, while the rest of the riders stayed aboard. Jordy climbed off and started his short hike out of the subway. The only thing that is known after that is that around 4 a.m., police found Jordy walking down the street in a daze. He was covered in an orange goo with the same texture as blood and stank like feces. It took a couple weeks for Jordy to even respond, and once he did, he still had no memory of what happened between approximately 10:30 p.m. and 4 a.m. when he was found. I tried to talk to Jordy since he and I was good friends, but he didn't appear to be the same man until at least 3 months later. After that, he returned to work and resumed his life, but still talked noticeably less than before. One day, he and I were alone on lunch hour, and he started to speak again. It was the first time I had actually seen him speak more than a couple words since the incident. "I saw the rat man," he said, staring at his glass. "You saw what?" I asked, thinking he was still delusional. "Actually, I fought him," Jordy said. He just came running at me, and before I knew it, I was being clawed up. It was mainly just scratches, but just the way he moved, it was so fast." Jordy shuddered. "I managed to land one good hit on him and dug my thumb in his eye before he started emitting the orange-colored blood. That was what really got me. The smell. The smell was unbearable. I wasn't sure how to react. What happened next? I asked him. He ran off after I got his eye. But I'm certain he didn't die, Jordy said, avoiding eye contact. He's still out there. He's still out there somewhere. And I have to finish him off. I have to. After that, Jordy became obsessed with this figure living in the subways. He'd often stay up all night riding the trams back and forth, hoping that it would break down. Other times, Jordy would actually take the extreme step of climbing down onto the tracks and following along them into the darkness, armed with a camera and a knife. He snapped pictures of anything that looked suspicious. I only saw Jordy a handful of times after he became so fixated on the RATMAN. Once I visited his apartment. It was absolutely littered with newspapers of clippings, sketches, printed articles, and alleged pictures, all of which supported the cryptid living in the subway. They dangled from his ceiling and covered the floors, walls, and even his bed. Jordy himself looked horrible as well. He rarely showered or shaved anymore, so he stank along with the apartment. I tried to convince him to go get help and try to clean himself up, along with his home, but he refused and I eventually left, defeated and worried about my friend. A few weeks later, Jordy quit showing up at work. It was just like that. No notice, no excuse, just complete absence. When my boss tried to phone his house, there was no answer. We all decided it'd be best to visit the apartment again, since he lived alone. When we approached the apartment complex, there was a large group of police officers surrounding the entrance. Apparently, Jordy wandered off into the black tunnels of the Underground Railway one night and never returned. A full-scale search was started 3 days after he didn't return to his apartment building. The search team ventured towards the heart of the subway, all the way to flocks of homeless people, where they questioned many of them. A few of the more competent hobos reported seeing a troubled man matching Jordy's description. According to them, the man they thought to be Jordy was distraught and nearly sprinting towards one of the tunnels. He was holding a flashlight and he had aimed it in the direction he was running. After that, nobody saw or heard anything else. After 3 more weeks, the search was closed and Jordy was given up for lost. There was never a body recovered, nor any evidence to suggest any fate for my friend. Since then, I avoided using the subway. I just can't seem to bring myself to see those tunnels again. However, some of my coworkers still take the trams home at night. The trains still break down at times, and stories still come trailing back from the depths. The homeless people still see a furry figure traversing the dark passageways of the tunnels. However, now there's a new series of sightings. Every so often, it is reported that beams of light sometimes flashes past distant tunnels. The description matches almost perfectly with that of a flashlight. Part of me feels that Jordy died that night he ventured off the train and fought whatever that was down in the tunnels. But the other part of me still thinks he's down there, and whatever it is he needs to finish, well, I hope he succeeds.
This is your buddy Darkness, and remember, darkness is only a switch away.